Can one stone change the course of history? I will tell you the story of David, who became one of the most famous kings who ever lived.
Episode 1 of House of David starts with a narrator questioning how a stone changed the course of history through David's story.
500 years after Moses split the sea.
The narrator quickly starts the story of how Saul was the first appointed king of Israel. After his anointing, Saul promptly won many hearts by winning every battle and securing the kingdom. The scene then cuts to the battle between the Israelites and the Philistines, Goliath mocking the Israelite soldiers for not coming up to fight against him. A young man courageously volunteers to go after Goliath with his stone sling, but is killed instantly. We circle back to a year earlier. Here we meet David, who is looking after his father's sheep. One of the sheep is attacked by a lion, but David manages to save it. Later that night, he takes the flock back home, and we get a whiff of the animosity between him and his family. The only one who is happy to see David is Ava, his young sister. His other brother mocks him for being a shepherd while their dad tells old stories from the days of Moses. Jesse wants his kids to know God and the history of the Israelites. Later, David gets into an argument with his dad over his harp. Jesse wishes David would throw it away. However, it is the only thing that David has to remember his mom, and will not part with it. They also argue about the return of the lion. In a flashback, we learn that David's mom was the one who taught him how to play the harp. Meanwhile, another battle on the other side of the kingdom rages on. Jonathan and his dad, King Saul, are fighting against the Amalekites. Samuel had instructed Saul to slay the Amalekite king, Agag, and destroy everything. However, Saul disobeys the Lord's orders and shares the plunder with the elders of the 12 tribes of Israelites. At the same time, Jonathan and his guard, Eliab, leave immediately to inspect a border village destroyed in the north of Bethlehem. There he finds a little boy, the sole survivor, and evidence that the giants have ravaged the village. The little boy, Reuben, refuses to speak, so Jonathan brings him back to the camp. He finds his brother enjoying the plunder from the latest victory and his dad putting up a stele. Saul feels Jonathan is needlessly worrying about Samuel and the giants and should relax. The same goes for the other family members. They are all happy to see Jonathan, but wish he would take it easy. Of course, Jonathan tries to caution Saul not to go against Samuel's instructions, but the king's ego gets the best of him. Saul decides to please the elders by sharing the plunder. He also keeps Agag alive to humiliate him at the celebratory party. Back in Judah, Jesse visits David while he is watching the sheep. David tries to convince his dad to let him leave the hills. David feels he is meant for more than shepherding. However, Jesse thinks otherwise and is angry at Saul for already taking his other sons. As they talk, the lion attacks their house and David rushes to save her. He decides to go after the lion against his dad's wishes. On the other hand, Samuel finishes his prayers and gets a message from God. He hurries to tell Saul the message and arrives at the party later that night. He confronts Saul for failing to heed God's instructions. Saul refuses to admit his mistakes, but Samuel knows he is lying. At first, Saul tries to question Samuel's authority and justify his actions. He questions why Agag is still alive and tells Saul that God has turned his spirit from him. Samuel makes it clear that Saul's disobedience has cost him and his generation their future. Not even Jonathan will inherit the throne. Immediately, Samuel starts his prophecy. A strong wind appears, scaring everyone at the party. Saul tries to beg for mercy, but Samuel tells him it is too late. The Lord has already chosen another, and Saul's legacy is done. Samuel then walks to Agag and slays him in front of everyone. In the meantime, a dark spirit comes over Saul. Samuel leaves after reminding everyone that God is not mocked. Back in Judah, David chases the lion to its cave and bravely kills it. The episode ends with him walking out of the cave while Samuel prepares himself to find the new king. Episode 2 starts with a flashback of young David with his mom. They were heading for morning prayers. After the prayers, a few family members confronted David's mom since she was Jesse's mistress. Still, she refuses to be shamed and fought back. She used to have visions and saw David's fate long before everyone. She tried to teach David to hear and see God, too.
Show me who I am.
Unfortunately, when David was young, she was killed by a lion while trying to protect him. Before her death, she told David that he had a bright future, but never explained it in detail. After her death, Jesse blamed David and sent him to the hills to look after the sheep. All this puts everything into perspective and explains why David went after the lion. Following his victory, David returns home with the lion's teeth, but Jesse welcomes him with a slap and a warning not to defile him again. Once again, the only one happy to see David is Ava. Meanwhile, at the fortress of Gibeah, Saul's condition gets worse. Michal worries that her father is losing it. He sleeps for days, and when he is awake, he barely seems like himself. She is not the only one concerned. Abner, Saul's advisor, and the queen are also worried. Their worry heightens when Saul reveals Samuel's words and swears them to secrecy. Abner says Samuel's committing treason, while the queen tries to assure Saul of his power. Saul orders Abner to get someone to follow Samuel. On the side, the queen asks Abner to slay the next person that Samuel anoints. Elsewhere in the city of Gath, King Achish tries to unite the Philistia to fight against the Hebrews. However, the 4 kings refuse to join King Achish, mostly because they don't think Saul is a big threat to them. If anything, they think King Achish is on a revenge mission. Saul killed his dad years ago in a battle. Still, King Achish refuses to give up and embarks on a journey to summon new gods. In the meantime, the princess, along with Joab and Eliab, visit Judah to celebrate a wedding. Though Michal tries to behave appropriately, Merab suspects that they went to Judah to distract people from Saul's illness. At the party, Michal is taken by David's singing talent. She tries to chat him up, but Joab intervenes. Eliab gives David a metal knife from the Amalekites, but David throws it away. Joab grows more offended by David, and Eliab intervenes to keep the peace. The following morning, David shows off his stone-slinging talent and begs Eliab to take him to the battlefield. After a while, Eliab agrees if only to stop David from going alone. On the way, David asks Eliab about his mom, and is happy that Eliab remembers his mom's good nature. On the way, they come across a burnt village and investigate. While there, King Achish corners David. Eliab tries to fight their way out. They manage to escape, but an arrow hits Eliab. David returns him home to get treatment. Back at the fortress, Abner tries to prepare Jonathan to take the throne. He worries that Saul's condition will only get worse. He offers to spar with Jonathan as he shares his worries. However, Saul interrupts them and asks to spar alone with Jonathan. He fights his son aggressively, reminding him that his time is yet to come. Jonathan is convinced that Samuel will get over his fight with Samuel, and God will return to their side. However, Saul claims that Samuel is jealous of his influence and power. Even with his father questioning Samuel's character, Jonathan refuses to believe that Samuel is acting in his self-interest. Later that night, Saul's condition gets worse, and he goes on a rampage. The incident shakes the queen, who has never seen her husband like this. Meanwhile, the commotion causes Jonathan to intervene, and he nearly dies at his father's hands. Jonathan and Abner calm Saul down and plead with him to rest. Episode 3 opens with King Saul tormented by yet another nightmare.
You will never be king. Because of you. No, because of your pride.
The evil spirit continues to haunt him, depriving him of rest. His visions are relentless. He sees Jonathan slain on the battlefield and hears Samuel's final prophecy echoing in his mind.
I am the King of Israel!
In his agitated and unstable state, his rage gets the best of him, leading to a tragic accident. He kills one of his servants, Josiah. Meanwhile, David rushes Eliab to a doctor who tends to his wounds. Guilt weighs heavily on David as he blames himself for what happened. In an attempt to ease Eliab's suffering, David picks up his harp and begins to play, the soothing melodies bringing a moment of peace amid the pain. Elsewhere, Abner meets with Doeg, instructing him to track Samuel's movements and report back. Doeg, already harboring resentment toward Samuel, agrees without hesitation. When Doeg mentions the growing rumors of Saul's curse, Abner dismisses them, pretending the issue does not exist. In the meantime, Samuel, having finished his prayers, confides in his wife about his troubled heart. He grieves for Saul's downfall and fears for his own safety, knowing that anointing another king while Saul still reigns is an act of treason. However, his wife encourages him to trust in God's plan, even finding amusement in the divine instructions. Resolute, Samuel gathers his apprentice and sets out for Judah to fulfill his mission. Back at the fortress, Queen Ahinoam consoles Josiah's grieving mother, but instead of telling the truth, she fabricates a story about his death. Later, driven by fear, she approaches Abner with a desperate request. She needs his help to contact a medium. She is aware that Abner's mother is among the seers and hopes he can arrange a meeting. Deeply concerned, she believes Saul is losing himself, and if they do not act soon, the kingdom may fall apart. Reluctantly, Abner agrees and takes the queen to a Baal priestess named Besai. The priestess, aware that Saul has outlawed idolatry, demands assurances that she will not be harmed for aiding the queen. Shocked by Ahinoam's request, Besai warns of the dangers of interfering with such dark forces. However, with the queen's assurance of secrecy, Besai proceeds with a ritual meant to counteract Saul's curse. Yet, despite her efforts, Samuel's divine influence proves too powerful, rendering the ritual ineffective. Later, Jonathan encounters Besai at the fortress and immediately realizes what the queen has done. Concerned, he pleads with his mother not to turn her back on God, warning her of the consequences of seeking help from forbidden sources. Sadly, Ahinoam refuses to listen, believing she is doing what is necessary for Saul's sake. Meanwhile, Doeg, following Abner's orders, makes his way to the city of Ramah in search of Samuel. Though Samuel remains elusive, Doeg stumbles upon his young apprentice, who had been left behind to wait. Seizing the opportunity, Doeg tortures the young man, demanding to know Samuel's whereabouts. Back in Judah, Samuel arrives in Bethlehem and requests to see Jesse. However, he is shocked to learn that Jesse has been cast out by the elders due to a past scandal. Determined to proceed, Samuel insists on performing a sacrificial ritual with Jesse's family. Upon arrival, Jesse is both honored and terrified by Samuel's visit. The prophet commands him to summon all his sons for the sacred offering, but Jesse deliberately excludes David. After the ritual, Samuel carefully observes Jesse's sons, searching for the one chosen by God. However, despite their strong appearances, none of them bear the mark of divine selection. Frustrated, Samuel demands that Jesse call for David. David's brothers, assuming he is in trouble, grow uneasy. Eliab, still weak, becomes protective. But as David arrives, the entire family is left speechless. Before their very eyes, Samuel anoints David as the future king of Israel. The prophet realizes that God has chosen David for his pure heart, rather than his strength or status. He even finds it almost ironic. Of all the warriors in the land, the Lord has chosen a humble shepherd. Yet Samuel does not question God's will and carries out the anointing without hesitation. Elsewhere, King Achish of the Philistines embarks on a treacherous journey to the Valley of Giants, seeking an alliance with the fearsome race. The path is fraught with danger, as many who enter the valley never return. Nevertheless, Achish presses on, determined to strike a deal that will strengthen his position against the Israelites. Upon reaching his destination, Achish presents his case to Oprah, the mother of the giants. He persuades her that by joining forces they can finally crush the Israelites once and for all. Oprah, intrigued by his proposition, introduces him to her mighty son, Goliath. Back at the fortress, Saul and his family attempt to maintain the illusion of stability. As he returns triumphantly to his throne, the elders and visitors shower him with praise, unaware of the darkness festering beneath the surface. Though he outwardly basks in the admiration, the truth remains. His grip on the kingdom is slipping, and danger looms ever closer. Episode 4 begins with David waking up near a lake, disoriented and unsure of his location. As he reaches out to touch the water, something mysterious happens. Later, David and Samuel sit together, discussing the events of his anointing. David confesses that he felt something stir inside him when Samuel poured the oil upon his head. Still struggling with doubt, he insists that he is not fit to be king and reminds Samuel that Israel already has one. Samuel reassures him, but as he touches David, he is struck by a vision a castle engulfed in flames. He tells David that there is great power within him, though the young shepherd struggles to believe it. As Samuel departs, David wishes to follow, but Samuel insists that he stay behind, warning that Saul would kill them both if he discovered the truth. Meanwhile, David's brothers react with disbelief and frustration, calling Samuel mad for anointing David. However, Jesse reminds them that everything Samuel has ever foretold has come to pass since he was a boy. Eliab, worried, fears they will all be branded as traitors if word gets out. Despite this, Jesse considers informing the elders. Near the riverbank, David experiences another vision. He sees a man clad in full warrior armor standing and staring at him. As David steps closer, he is suddenly thrown back by an unseen force. At that moment, Eliab kicks him awake, snapping him out of the vision, even suggesting selling him into slavery in Egypt. Eliab, more serious, warns David to stay in the hills and never speak of Samuel's visit, insisting that the king will have him, and all of them, executed if the truth is revealed. Their cousin, Joab, the king's commanding officer, arrives unexpectedly with a royal summons for David. The family is shocked and uneasy about what this means. At the palace, King Saul's second son, Eshbaal, notices his father's troubled state. In an effort to ease the burden, he suggests organizing entertainment and theatrical performances to win the people's love. However, Saul dismisses the idea, coldly telling Eshbaal that leadership is not his strength. Suddenly, a man, an elder from the house of Dan, forces his way into the chamber. He accuses Eshbaal of defiling his daughter and demands that he marry her to unite their houses. Eshbaal vehemently refuses, leading to a heated argument. Before things escalate, Queen Ahinoam steps in and tells the elder to return the next day so the matter can be discussed with the king. Meanwhile, as David prepares to leave his home, Jesse commands Eliab to protect him and their household. That evening, as the royal family gathers for dinner, tensions flare. Eshbaal argues with Saul, but the king, overwhelmed by rage, declares that his son is cursed.
You are nothing but the curse!
Later, the queen privately speaks with Eshbaal, recalling a past incident from his childhood. The next morning, she makes a fateful decision. She orders Eshbaal to leave the city and go to Endor, a place known for harboring criminals and outcasts. Meanwhile, Samuel is devastated to discover his apprentice, Silas, burned alive. When David arrives in Gibeah, he is brought before Queen Ahinoam, who reveals why he has been summoned. She wants him to play music to soothe King Saul's troubled mind. She warns David to keep the king's condition a secret. Later, David is escorted into the king's chambers, where he finds Saul in a state of anger and unrest. As Princess Michal enters the room, she notices David's anxiety and gently calms him. David then begins to play his harp, and his sorrowful yet beautiful melody fills the room. The music deeply moves everyone present, bringing them to tears and easing their pain. Afterward, Eliab warns David not to get too comfortable at the palace, particularly about his growing interactions with the princess. Meanwhile, a mysterious witch warns the queen about David, saying that although he brings light, he also carries darkness within him. Despite Eliab's warnings, David begins wandering the palace late at night, drawn to a hidden study filled with ancient scrolls. He is startled when Princess Michal suddenly appears. Though she tells him he shouldn't be there, she ultimately invites him to stay. She shows him the ancient scrolls containing the songs of Moses, but is surprised to learn that David cannot read. Curious, she reads the lyrics aloud to him and wonders what the songs would sound like if put to music. The next morning, David surprises everyone by playing the songs of Moses for King Saul in the palace garden. Princess Michal, deeply moved, watches in awe. David sings the song with such beauty that even Saul, in his troubled state, praises him. Meanwhile, Joab and Eliab are summoned to the Lord Commander's chamber, where they are informed that a newly anointed king has been chosen from the tribe of Judah. They are tasked with executing the supposed pretender to the throne. As Joab questions Eliab about Samuel's visit to the village, Prince Jonathan enters abruptly, ordering them to leave at once. Another border has been attacked. Eliab, realizing David may be in danger, rushes to find him. However, David is nowhere to be found. At the same time, Princess Michal secretly summons David to the study room to teach him how to read. As they talk, she expresses her growing fears about her family's future. She believes they are no longer God's favored, but David reassures her that his music will bring comfort to both her and the king. Michal then writes his name on a scroll, gifting it to him. As dawn breaks, Prince Jonathan, Eliab, and Joab set out on a mission to defend Israel. Meanwhile, Samuel reunites with his wife, Helah, relieved to find her unharmed. He warns her, revealing that Saul has ordered his death and they must leave immediately. Elsewhere, Eshbal's carriage is ambushed and set ablaze by an unknown assailant. As the flames engulf his transport, a shadowy figure appears and orders him to follow. Episode 5 opens with David playing his harp while sitting atop the walls of Gibeah. As the dawn breaks, his beautiful voice echoes through the castle walls. With Princess Michal listening from afar. Meanwhile, Abner, King Saul's right-hand man, rides out beyond the gates to meet Adriel, the senior elder of the Judah tribe. Initially, their conversation is casual, but Adriel soon realizes Abner's true intentions. Abner subtly implies that information about Samuel's visit to Judah is valuable, and hints that certain assurances must be made before sharing it. As Abner returns to Gibeah, he informs Queen Ahinoam that Samuel has anointed another and warns that, sooner or later, the tribes will shift their loyalties. He suggests that the house of Saul must demonstrate its strength. However, the queen, under the influence of Besai, the witch of Endor, is convinced that it is time to display love rather than power. She begins planning a political marriage to secure alliances. As the queen prepares to welcome their guests, David and Princess Michal spend time in the study room, where David practices his reading skills. Just as David is about to confide in Michal about his secret, Queen Ahinoam enters. She sends Michal away to prepare herself, then warns David never to meet the princess alone again. She reminds him that his only purpose in the palace is to play music for the king. Meanwhile, in her chambers, Queen Ahinoam observes Saul as he prepares for the gathering. He is still not fully present, lost in his own thoughts. Besai, frustrated, claims that she can do no more without resorting to sorcery. Saul, suspicious of Adriel, questions whether they should align with his house, but Ahinoam dismisses his concerns, calling Adriel a fool, yet a powerful one whose loyalty must be secured through marriage. As Saul gazes at Ahinoam, he adorns her with the same nostalgic necklace he gifted her in Episode 2. She urges him not to let Adriel's words shake him. When Michal arrives, beautifully dressed in red, Saul marvels at her regal appearance and informs her of their plans. Later, David meets Eliab, who has just returned from investigating attacks on 10 border towns.
Reuben says he sees giants in his dreams.
As they speak, David sees Michal pass by, her eyes filled with tears. The gathering begins in a grand hall decorated with banners, one bearing the wolf of Benjamin and the other the lion of Judah. The house of Saul and the house of Adriel make their entrance.
Leader of the great tribe of Judah, his wife Tamar, and his
Adriel
sons.
boasts about the hardships endured on their journey, to which Saul responds by thanking him for his unwavering service since his coronation. Saul then announces his intent to unite their houses by marrying Michal to one of Adriel's sons.
Today I offer up my daughter in marriage.
David is visibly shaken by the news and struggles to focus on playing his music. Meanwhile, Michal listens in silence as Adriel's sons boast about their battlefield prowess. When Adriel inquires about Saul's health, the king admits that he is only human and had been sick for a time, but claims he has recovered. Leering at Michal, Adriel openly praises her beauty and goes so far as to say that he would marry her himself if his wife were dead. Privately, Joab complains to Abner that Adriel's sons are unworthy and that this union will not benefit the house of Saul. Abner, however, urges him to let it go, but also warns him that he should be more concerned about David, who is watching Michal closely. David follows Michal after the gathering, but she urges him to return and play, reminding him that they both have their roles to fulfill. When David insists on telling her the truth about himself, Eliab intervenes, stopping him. David argues that if he marries into Saul's house, he could ascend to the throne without bloodshed. However, Eliab warns him that Saul will see him as a threat and advises him to return to his music. While Adriel's sons surround Michal, his middle son, Jordan, approaches Merab. Both feel overshadowed, Jordan because he is the middle child, and Merab because she is rebellious. They bond over their shared sense of insignificance, watching as the other suitors compete for Michal's favor. During negotiations, Adriel expresses interest in acquiring a copy of the Genesis scroll containing Jacob's blessing for Judah, Genesis 49:8-12. However, Saul grows distracted as his tormenting spirit manifests, taking the form of Agag and filling his mind with paranoia. David begins playing his harp, bringing Saul back to reality just in time.
Perhaps you have not fully recovered your strength after all.
Adriel, noticing the shift in Saul's demeanor, questions whether the king is truly fit to negotiate. Saul abruptly dismisses the topic of the scroll and demands to know Adriel's real request. Adriel admits that he seeks a permanent seat on Saul's council. Saul agrees, but once Adriel leaves, he vents to Ahinoam, calling him a jackal. She calmly reassures him, saying that now the jackal belongs to him. Observing Saul and Ahinoam together, David reflects on what it must be like to marry for love. When Saul asks David which of Adriel's sons Michal should marry, David boldly suggests himself.
She should marry me.
Though Saul laughs, he recognizes that Michal loves none of Adriel's sons. Realizing that Merab instead seems interested in Jordan, Saul unexpectedly announces that Merab, not Michal, will be the one to marry.
Beautiful as it is, will be between my lovely daughter, Merab and Jordan.
Michal, relieved, leaves the hall. Surprised, Merab admits that she always believed Saul favored Michal, the perfect daughter, and never truly cared about her happiness. In response, Saul explains that while Michal follows expectations, Merab chooses to act on her own will, just like her mother. He reassures Merab that he has always considered her happiness but urges her to ensure that the house of Adriel remains loyal. Merab promises that she will not allow the house of Saul to be divided. Later that night, Joab ambushes David as he walks along the fortress wall, grabbing him and dangling him over the edge. He accuses David of defying the house of Saul and corrupting the princess. Joab scorns Eliab for being too soft on David and threatens to kill him unless he swears to never see or think of Michal again. However, David does not fight back or plead. Instead, he challenges Joab to drop him, declaring that he has a purpose within the house of Saul. He then questions whether Joab himself knows his own destiny. Stunned by David's resolve, Joab ultimately lets him go. Meanwhile, Ahinoam visits Michal in her chambers. She warns her daughter against falling for a mere shepherd like David. Though Michal reminds her that Saul himself was once a herdsman, Ahinoam insists that as the daughter of a king, she is unfit for such a man. She acknowledges David's charm but warns that his presence could bring ruin upon their house. As the two prepare to make the deal official, Saul offers Adriel a copy of the scroll containing Jacob's blessing. Adriel gratefully receives it and asks to read it aloud to the crowd.
And Israel called for his sons and said,
While he reads, the apparition of Agag returns, warning Saul once again that the Lion of Judah will turn against him and take his throne. As Adriel continues, he reaches the passage, "The scepter shall not depart from Judah."
Well, I have not finished the blessing.
Enraged, Saul stops Adriel and recites Jacob's blessing upon the ravenous wolf of Benjamin, Genesis 49:27. He accuses Adriel of trying to steal his throne and immediately revokes the marriage agreement. When Ahinoam tries to calm him and urges him to rest, Saul suddenly grabs her by the throat, tearing her necklace in the process. Screaming, he sends Adriel away and rips down the flag of Judah, while his daughters scramble to collect the scattered stones from Ahinoam's broken necklace. That night, Saul lies in bed, restless and oppressed by the spirit, while Ahinoam watches over him. Besai arrives and urges Ahinoam to let her use dark magic and sorcery to drive out the spirit tormenting Saul. She insists that it is Saul himself who cannot be trusted, not her magic. When Ahinoam reminds her that the laws against sorcery cannot be changed without the king's seal, Besai tells her to take it herself. After hesitating, Ahinoam removes Saul's ring. Later, unable to sleep, Saul wanders into the throne room. David, also awake, encounters him there. Saul wonders aloud how he will be remembered, regretting the pain he has caused Merab, but still believing that Adriel was after his throne. He reflects on how every man desires the throne, but few understand how it changes them, leaving them misunderstood and alone. David assures Saul that his family will forgive him because they love him. Saul then offers David the chance to sit on the throne, suggesting he see what it feels like. David initially refuses, but after Saul leaves for his chambers, David hesitates and then cautiously sits on the throne. Unbeknownst to him, Michal watches from the shadows.
It all began in the days of the Great Rebellion.
Episode 6 opens with a stunning scene depicting the ancient story of fallen angels and mortal women falling in love, resulting in the birth of giants. Orpah recounts the tale to Goliath, telling him that he and his brothers are the last of the Nephilim. Goliath then asks, "If we are sons of God, why are we hiding in a cave?" In Philistine, one of the kings is summoned by Achish, the king of Gath. The summoned king is frustrated by Achish's belief in giants, dismissing them as fantasy and myth. Achish, however, firmly insists they are real. As Orpah and Goliath approach the city, Goliath pulling his mother's carriage, Achish comes out to welcome them. The other king is visibly shocked, and Achish commands that all the kings gather at the valley of Elah. Back in Gibeah, David sings to King Saul while Princess Michal listens. Merab enters and speaks about their duties as princesses, expressing her sorrow for their brother Eshbal. Michal confides that she has seen a different side of David, while Merab reminds her that women like them are merely ladders for men to climb in pursuit of their ambitions. King Saul shares stories from his life before becoming king, when he was just a donkey shepherd like David. He tells David that anything is possible. Elsewhere, a servant brings the boy Reuben to Dog in exchange for a coin. Reuben begins to describe the night Samuel visited King Saul. In Philistine, King Achish presents Goliath with a sword and shield. Goliath gratefully accepts and begins sparring with Philistine soldiers, easily overpowering them with his unmatched strength. Pleased at first, Achish later discovers that Orpah's true plan is to make Goliath ruler over all lands after the war and demand complete loyalty from the kings. Achish refuses. As Orpah leaves, she warns him, "Once you awaken the giants, they seldom go back to sleep." At the palace, King Saul meets with his council to discuss the Philistine army's latest movements. Saul insists on attacking first, but Abner recommends a defensive approach. Enraged by their caution, Saul declares he has overcome greater odds with God behind him. But as he speaks, he realizes God's presence is no longer with him. He storms out, and Jonathan follows, warning him about the giants. Saul, angered by his son's fear, denounces the weakness of his sons and advisers, vowing to prove his strength. Meanwhile, Michal summons David and confronts him about keeping secrets. David pleads with her to leave the palace and run away with him, but she refuses to surrender to her emotions. She confesses that she loves him, but knows they can never be together. As Goliath and Orpah return to the valley, Doeg appears, claiming that he knows another way to get what the kings want. Back in Gibeah, Queen Ahinoam and the witch Besai attempt to use black magic to heal King Saul's unrest. At the same time, David decides to flee the palace. As he searches for Michal one last time, Eliab finds him, grabs him by the neck, and forces him to return home. Jonathan intervenes, saying David is there to bring peace to Saul. Eliab, however, declares that David has been a curse to their house and prays he is not part of Saul's destiny. Hearing Saul's shouting, they rush to his chamber and discover Besai performing a ritual, immediately stops it and pushes her out. Before leaving, Besai looks at David and says, "You caused all this," then turns to Jonathan and says, "You will never be king." Back in the giant's cave, one of Orpah's sons challenges her decision, but she quickly reasserts her authority, warning that they must find a new home now that their location has been discovered. Later, Saul tends to David's injured finger, wounded from playing the harp too long. Speaking as if to his son Jonathan, Saul confesses his fear of losing his crown. Meanwhile, as Orpah brings food to her sons, she is murdered by Doeg, who reveals that he is from the house of Saul. Hearing her scream, Goliath rushes to find her dying. Before her final breath, she tells him to avenge her death upon the house of Saul. The next morning, Merab catches David attempting to leave the palace. Sensing his true love for Michal, she decides to test his feelings by trying to seduce him, but David remains loyal, confirming that his heart belongs only to Michal. Jonathan sets off to find Samuel on his father's behalf, while David quietly leaves the city. Upon reaching Mount Sinai, struck by a vision. In it, King Saul is killed in battle, and Jonathan dies alongside him. As he emerges from the vision, Samuel mistakes him for a threat and attacks, only realizing it is Jonathan afterward. During their conversation, Jonathan recalls Samuel's past loyalty to his father and asks why Saul is cursed. Samuel explains that Saul lost his way and began to see himself as God. He adds that the curse came by God's command and that he has no power to change it. When asked about Jonathan's own vision, Samuel says he cannot confirm if it will come to pass, but advises him to journey back through the great valley, where he sees great darkness ahead. Later, in a delirious hallucination, Saul envisions Goliath approaching with a sword, preparing to kill him. He cries out for David to calm him, but is informed that David has already left. Meanwhile, Hebrew soldiers camping near the mountain hear heavy footsteps approaching. Terrified, they look up to see Goliath emerge. At dawn in the village, Jesse and Ava see David returning while tending the sheep. They warmly welcome their son and brother. Elsewhere, Jonathan rides out and sees the Philistine army advancing. He returns to warn the palace, but the news has already arrived. The kingdom prepares for war, and Saul enters, ordering the tribes to be summoned and ready for battle. Back in Gath, Goliath walks into Achish's palace, kneels and declares he will kill them all.
Let me kill them all.
Episode 7 starts as usual, with David playing his music near the hills of Bethlehem. As dawn breaks, Jesse's sons prepare for the journey to answer the battle call from King Saul. One of his sons, Nathaniel, tries to convince their father that he is not capable of fighting and will likely die in battle. As David walks in, he offers to take Nathaniel's place, but Jesse refuses. David accuses Jesse of never being honest with him and demands to know why he is never sent to the battlefield. Jesse brushes him off, and David, upset, walks away. In the valley of Elah, the Philistine armies are preparing for battle. The 4 kings of the Philistines and the giants are ready. On the other side of the encampment, King Saul prepares for battle while Abner helps him into his armor. As Joab and Jonathan survey the massive Philistine force, over 150,000 men, as young Israelite boy, Eliezer asks if Samuel will come to bless the battle as he had in previous campaigns. Jonathan avoids the question, choosing to leave the boy with false hope rather than none at all. As Saul moves through the troops, he encounters Adriel, the elder of Judah, who arrives with 25,000 men and publicly pledges support, while privately reminding Saul that their past altercation has not been forgotten. Men cheer defiantly as Saul rides by proudly. Back in Bethlehem, David continues tending to his shepherd duties, playing his harp and reminiscing about his childhood. He is surprised to see Samuel, who asks to be taken to Jesse. As they eat together, Jesse apologizes for the humble meal, saying he has sent his best to the king's army. Samuel questions whether that is truly the case. Seizing the moment, Samuel speaks metaphorically about olive trees and how each has a unique purpose in every season. Frustrated by the riddles, Jesse demands to know why Samuel has come. Samuel responds that he has come to atone for the sins of the house through a sacrifice. With vultures circling, Achish rides out from the Philistine camp and plants his flag, followed by representatives from Ashkelon, Ashdod, and Gaza, with Ekron notably absent. By now, the Philistine force has grown to 200,000 men. The lords of the Philistines are eager to launch their attack, but Achish insists on first breaking Israel's spirit. To do this, Goliath emerges from the Philistine lines, evoking shock and fear among the Israelites. Joab calls him a god of the earth. Goliath challenges Saul to call on his gods while the Philistines do the same, to see who prevails. As Saul listens, he is struck by a terrifying vision of Goliath drinking blood and holding Saul's skull. He falls from his horse, smashing the vial of Besai's potion, his last defense against madness. He flees the front lines, shouting that any man who defeats the giant will win his daughter's hand. That night, as David plays music for Samuel, David then shares his visions of a mountain garden, which Samuel identifies as the Garden of Eden, and a warrior with a drawn sword, whom Samuel reveals as the captain of the Lord's armies. Samuel explains that the walls of Jericho fell because Joshua was willing to fall down in worship before the commander, not asking, "Is God with us?" but instead, "Are we with God?" and "What would you have your servant do?" When David wonders why God is showing him visions while keeping him at home, Samuel notes that David is speaking as if today were yesterday. Echoing the words of Koheleth, he reminds David that to everything there is a season and a time for every purpose. Over the next several days, Goliath continues to issue his challenge, demanding a champion from Israel to face him in single combat. When word reaches Ahinoam in Gibeah that Goliath has appeared and Saul has fallen into madness, she is overcome with despair and declares there is nothing more to be done. When Michal suggests praying to Hashem, Ahinoam bitterly forbids her from ever speaking that name again. Refusing to give in to her mother's despair, Michal retrieves a scroll from the scriptorium and prepares to ride out in search of her father. Merab finds her and pleads with her to stay, but when it becomes clear Michal will leave regardless, Merab offers to go with her. Discouraged by Saul's absence, the tribe of Zebulun leaves the Israelite host. When Eliab calls them cowards, they retaliate by asking why he hasn't faced the giant himself. Adriel sympathizes with the Zebulunites and offers to lead the charge, criticizing Jonathan for hiding in his father's tent. Though Abner silences him, Jonathan realizes he must act. He begins to arm himself to confront Goliath, despite Abner's warning that it would be suicide. Later, as Samuel offers a sacrifice with David and Jesse, he declares that Jesse's sin is atoned for, the sacrifice being worthy, chosen according to the law, from the best of the flock, without blemish. Dismissing David to the fields, Samuel senses Jesse's heart remains heavy with unspoken guilt. When Samuel confronts him about withholding David from the army, Jesse claims he is protecting David from himself. Samuel explains this is exactly the kind of sacrifice God demands, the best of the flock, that which we love most. He warns Jesse that if he clings to David, his fingers will break. Later, while Goliath continues to taunt Israel, Abner suggests an alternative. He tells Jonathan that as he once led a bold raid with his servant, he could now lead a band of Gentile mercenaries into the Philistine camp at night to kill Goliath in his sleep. As David sleeps, he has another vision of the commander standing in the stream. This time, David realizes he must remove his sandals and bow in worship. When he asks what the Lord commands, the commander points his sword into the water. David reaches down and retrieves a blood-covered pebble. He wakes up in a rush and, frustrated, asks why God would choose him for a task he'll never fulfill. As if in answer, Jesse calls for him from home. When David arrives, he finds Jesse loading a donkey with provisions. To his surprise, Jesse tells him that he is to deliver food to the battlefield. Before David departs, Jesse confesses long-held truths. He explains that his first wife, the mother of David's brothers, was of pure bloodline, chosen to counter Jesse's own tainted Moabite heritage from Ruth. David's mother, Nitzevet, was a Gentile, warm in spirit but plagued by visions of David. Her final wish was for Jesse to release David so he could rise and fulfill those visions. Jesse confesses that keeping David in the fields wasn't out of shame, but because David is all that remains of Nitzevet. They embrace, and Jesse asks for David's forgiveness. Before departing, Jonathan goes to say farewell to his father and finds Doeg waiting in Saul's tent. Jonathan shows contempt for the nihilistic Edomite, who offers to help if Jonathan reveals the name of the man Samuel anointed. Jonathan refuses, vowing that even if he dies, he'll take Doeg with him. Turning to Saul, Jonathan reveals that he knows the truth about Samuel, but still chooses to stay with his father until the end. As he leaves, Saul is haunted by his vision of Jonathan's death. Jonathan meets the mercenaries, and Abner arms him with a dagger and prays for God to be with him. As David prepares to leave, Jesse blesses him once more. Samuel departs in a different direction, also blessing David, reminding him that the Lord sees his heart, the heart of a roaring lion. Watching his son ride away, Jesse calls out, "Rise, David! Rise to meet your destiny!"
There's no champion in Israel. Anybody who will fight me.
The episode begins with Prince Jonathan and a group of mercenaries from Endor attempting an ambush, while the tribe of Zebulun begins abandoning the Israelites near a narrow mountain canal. Jonathan is betrayed by the mercenaries, as King Achish is already aware of the ambush. He signals his army, who are waiting to slaughter the tribe of Zebulun. A flaming arrow is fired, and the entire tribe is mercilessly massacred. Nearby, Princess Michal and Merab witness the horror. Though terrified, they continue on their journey to find their father. Jonathan fights off the Philistine soldiers one by one, but is eventually overpowered and forced to his knees. The next morning, at the Israelite encampment, soldiers wait hopelessly. Goliath appears as usual, taunting them and demanding a champion to face him. This time, he throws down the severed heads of the assassins and begins mocking them again. As King Achish speaks to Jonathan, we learn that the 5th Philistine army, Ekron, has already joined the alliance. The final army is at the back for Israelites' camp with more giants. Achish tells a story from 500 years ago, recalling how Moses led the Hebrew slaves out of Egypt to this land. He claims the Philistines were once kings and nobles who crossed the seas to rule. while the Hebrews were born to
Jonathan, I
serve.
want you to look east.
Achish warns Jonathan that at sunrise he will unleash his full force. He gives Jonathan a choice: return to Saul and surrender, or send a champion, and live the rest of their days in slavery. As he leaves, Achish warns Jonathan that the next time they meet, his arrow will pierce Jonathan's heart.
My arrow will pierce your heart.
Back in Gath, Queen Ahinoam realizes her daughters are missing and sets out to find Saul to help ease his torment.
Left. To go where?
Go!
Get out of sight.
When Michal finally reaches her father, she begins to read aloud from Moses' scriptures, and Saul starts to come out of his tormented coma.
Is it really you?
Meanwhile, back at the palace, Ahinoam fears the end of Saul's legacy and Israel's kingdom. She prepares herself for death, believing it's only a matter of time before the Philistines storm the palace. Suddenly, Eshbaal storms in. Elsewhere, David is traveling to the battlefield, leading a donkey loaded with food for his brothers. When he arrives, the first thing he sees is the Israelite army doing nothing, sitting in hopeless silence. He sees Goliath and remembers the lion he once killed. David boldly declares that if no one will fight Goliath, he will. Everyone laughs, thinking he's joking. Abner arrives and orders David to go to King Saul and play music for him. But when David is brought before Saul, he surprises everyone by declaring that he wants to fight the giant. Though the king tries to dismiss him as just a boy, David speaks with such confidence and conviction that Saul agrees, naming him Israel's champion and giving him his own armor. Back in Gath, Eshbaal declares that he is the true hope of Israel. He convinces his mother to crown him the new king before the Philistine army arrives. The people believe the war is already lost.
Your protector.
As expected, no one believes in David. Many begin to think Saul has lost his mind. As David puts on the king's armor, Michal gives him a scroll with one of Joshua's writings she remembered. She encourages him to be brave and asks him to come back after slaying the giant. She kisses him, giving him strength. David removes the armor, saying he needs to be himself, and admits that he is terrified. Abner sees Jonathan return to camp and informs him that Saul has named David as champion. Meanwhile, Adriel attempts to stir a rebellion, but Abner and Saul confront and stop him. Jonathan follows David to the stream and tries to talk him out of it. But after seeing David's unshakable faith in God, he relents. He realizes that Samuel had indeed visited David's house. David is the anointed one. Jonathan decides to believe in both David and God's plan. David steps onto the battlefield with courage, proclaiming that God will fight for Israel. The Philistines are insulted to see a boy sent to face their giant. Goliath mocks David, but David declares God is with Israel. He runs straight at Goliath, dodging his massive attacks. The scene flashes back to episode 1, David's earlier attempt to fight the giant. Goliath strikes him down again. The Philistines cheer, and the Israelites lose hope. Suddenly, Samuel appears on the mountaintop, surrounded by the smoke of sacrifice. David struggles to stand but sees the bloody pebble from his earlier vision. He rises as all eyes turn to him. David swings his sling. Goliath's spear misses. The giant falters, confused. His hand shakes. Blood begins to drip from his forehead. Everyone watches in shock. Goliath collapses. King Saul immediately commands his army to advance. David, without hesitation, draws Goliath's own sword and decapitates him. Jonathan charges forward, and the army follows. The episode ends with Israel's army marching to face the full Philistine force, just as Eshbaal's coronation ceremony takes place in Gath.